And we're back. We're back 28 minutes after the hour here on WBOK, 12:30 a.m., the station you listen to all day long. Well, we have them. They're here in the studio from the Bureau of Governmental Research. Is it government or governmental?
Governmental.
Governmental Research. The president and CEO, Ms. Rebecca Mowbray, and the research analyst, Mr. Paul Rue. They're both here in the studio. Welcome to the Good Morning Show.
Thank you, Torrin. It's so great to be here.
Yes.
Appreciate you inviting us.
Hey.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. And you made it before the rain has come.
Very happy about that.
That's right. But so first, we'd like to make sure our listeners know not only, the individuals, but the organizations that are here and talking about really important topics. So it'll start with you, Ms. Mowbray. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to this type of work in the first place first.
Sure. Thanks so much. Well, I'll start with the organization. The Bureau of Governmental Research is a private, nonprofit, independent research organization that's all about informed public policy making and the effective use of resources to improve local government in Orleans, Jefferson, and St. Tammany parishes. And what that means is that we try to look for constructive solutions to the things that hold us back, and we try to provide some guidance at election time on things like local millages. As far as for me personally, I've been in New Orleans for 23 years now. I was a reporter at the Times-Picayune for a long time, and then I worked at the Inspector General's office, and I love trying to understand what's really going on and trying to come up with solutions that help people. Great.
And Mr. Paul Rue, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the BGR.
Similar to Becky, I've been here about 23 years and also worked at the Times-Picayune for about 12 years before joining BGR. And just a very natural transition. I mean, it's similar to what you do as a reporter. Just dig maybe a little deeper. And then the advocacy piece, taking a position to help steer public policy in a direction that we think is more effective.
Yeah. Now, the BGR, you mentioned several parishes that that's your sphere of influence. Do other states, cities have BGRs also? Or how unique is our BGR in terms of here?
Great question. So I learned in joining BGR last year that there's actually an organization called the Governmental Research Association. It's a national group, and there are groups just like BGR in many areas around the country. Some of them operate, in a city or a metro area, and some of them are statewide. They're not in every place, but they're in a lot of places around.
Yeah, and Paul, I know so you've been there for several years. You do a lot of the real work in terms of the reports and everything. What are some of the reports that people may have heard of in the past? So what would you think are some of the ones that have really kind of made an impact?
Yeah, I mean, probably one was called the $1 billion question. And what we did is we looked at where do all the tax dollars and public revenues go in Orleans Parish. Just all the different, some 40, 50 entities that receive a slice of that tax pie.
Yes.
And where is it going? And so that was one. And then we've updated that to give folks just a comprehensive view of where do their tax dollars go, what purposes, how much for public safety, how much for public education, things like that. So that would probably be one report.
Yeah. And for the average report, how much time do y'all put in? And
well, they can, they can take a lot of time. We did a report last year on the jail called Keys to the Jail that had been in the works on and off for a number of years, actually, until we completed that. So.
Okay. And how can people access the reports, the old reports as well as this current one we're going to talk about right now?
Yeah, they're all on our website, BGR, www.bgr.org.
Okay. So let's get right to it. So there is an election. In fact, there's early voting going on right now, and tomorrow it ends. And then on April 29th, which is Jazz Fest Day, but it's also Election Day. There's an election on the ballot. So first, I don't know which one of you would like to explain first what exactly this millage for the sheriff is really all about. What are the basics first?
Sure, yeah. What the sheriff's office is proposing is there's an existing property tax of 2.8 mils, and the office is asking voters to nearly double that to 5.5 mils. And so that would bring in an additional nearly $12 million for the office for primarily for some salary increases, staff training, and some capital needs that the jail has.
Okay. And so the BGR, I guess we need to tell that, has said that they're opposed to this. Give us some of the rationales for the opposition
Sure.
that the report notes.
We'd like to start, Torrin, by saying that we give the sheriff credit for, she took office last year and is really aiming to try to solve the problems at the jail. As you're aware, the jail in Orleans Parish has been under federal oversight or investigation for 50 years. And
Wait, but say that. So for 5-0?
5-0.
Half a century.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must be a record.
Yeah. And, just something's not working right. And
Yes.
To Sheriff Hudson's credit, I think she's, really, she campaigned on the idea that she really wants to fix things. And she has said that, she's going for this tax because she feels like there are resources that she needs to do what she needs to do. The reason why, and we applaud her for that, the reason why we came out against this is because our feeling is that whenever a public entity goes out for a tax, they really owe it to the public to have a very detailed plan with how they're going to use the money. Because if you go out and ask for a tax, then, people only have so much ability to pay, and you can't just willy-nilly put taxes out there, because if you put it for one thing, then maybe there's some other need that's really important to people and, that could be more worthy. You don't know. And voters can't judge until they have more information. And in this case, and we can go into some of the concerns that we had, but there is 2 years left on the existing tax that provides money to the sheriff's office. So we just felt like there is an opportunity for them to come back with more detail and give the public with what they need. And also, we feel like there are other ways to fund the office that could be a better way to go as well.
Yeah, and now, Paul, I know the report mentions the prematurity, perhaps, quote unquote, of it. Speak a little bit more to that, and then a key part of that, because we had the sheriff on last week talking about the proposal, and of course, staffing being a major issue, saying that she needs to basically double her staff, and on top of that, give raises to really attract people who will stay and be for retention. But also the report notes that some of that is not really spelled out. So talk about those two issues.
Yeah, the premature. Well, the staffing needs is a good one to start with, because the sheriff has said the office has about 400 essential positions that are vacant. But this plan, that this tax revenue really wouldn't go towards filling those vacancies. The money would go towards salary increases for existing employees and training and other needs, but not really filling these vacancies. And so that would be a large unmet need that would still be hanging out there. And the city, as the primary funder of the jail, that's where the sheriff's office gets most of its revenue at 75+% from the city. And so that would be left still for the city and sheriff to kind of, try to sort out a solution for how they're going to meet that very large need that this tax proposal does not address. And so that's one of the reasons why we felt like it's premature, that there needs to be more of a comprehensive plan to identify all the jail's needs and come up with a plan for funding those needs. Now,
I know I've heard some pushback to this analysis saying, well, there have been other millages passed that didn't spell everything out. Now, I don't know how true. Do you believe that's true? One, and if so, then and I think it looks like, I don't know, since about 4 million here, how the office would use another 4 million and another 1.8 million. Does it all have to be spelled out, or Could there be miscellaneous in the tax? And also address that issue of were there other millages that didn't completely spell out that have passed?
We try to, when we analyze a tax proposal, we ask the same questions every time.
Okay.
Is there a spending plan? And has there been good financial stewardship and accountability for the resources? Is this a good way to fund the need that is expressed? And is there evidence that the tax would result in effective outcomes for citizens? We apply that same analysis every time, and they're just, in this case, as Paul mentioned, Torrin, there's a lot of holes in it, and it does appear that salaries at the jail are low and that they do need to go up. Now, there's been a start on that with the this city council approved, and last year the sheriff in December started to implement $2.43 raises for hourly employees there, and the city did indicate at the time that they were willing to come back and when the sheriff had used the money that she had to fund those, then to come back. There is a lot for them to figure out about how much money the jail actually needs and things. But when you've got holes like what Paul was describing with these 400 positions that the sheriff's office says are essential not being in it, and then we haven't even talked about, the federal court is ordering the city and the sheriff's office to build this phase 3 expansion of the jail with medical and mental health needs, and that's not included. Surely that's going to cost money, and that hasn't been included either.
Yeah, we're talking to Rebecca Mowbray, CEO and president of Bureau of Governmental Research, and Mr. Paul Rue, research analyst with BGR. You can give us a call at 504-582-9422 with a question or comment. And yet, let's get into that issue. You make an interesting point that if the millage were passed, that the city council could still come back and say, okay, you're going to get an extra $12 million minus that from our allocation. Now, that doesn't seem fair with that to happen. I mean, has the city council ever kind of done anything like that? Is that a real fear or possibility?
That is very much a risk that we identified in analyzing the proposition. There's, the sheriff again would get about $12 million in additional revenue from this, but the city could just reduce its allocation to offset some or even all of that amount. There's no guarantee. The council told us they would have to, as part of their fiduciary duty, would have to take that additional revenue the sheriff would be getting into account when deciding how much to allocate from the city's budget.
Yeah, so. but I guess why would they do something like that if that were to happen? Because raising the poor, what government would say, well, we don't want the extra tax money, and I think everyone recognizes that there are actual needs there.
Well, I mean, it's possible because the sheriff last year had asked for an increase in the budget at the jail. It was about $13 million they were looking for. The city council said no, and that's when Sheriff Hudson decided to go for this tax. And so, the city council's objection at the time was that they felt like they didn't know enough about the jail and the needs and things like that, and they wanted more proof that the money was needed. So, if OPSO gets the tax, the council could just decide to back it out, and then that they'd rather put the money elsewhere. And so we're not any further ahead in and so
it
giving
sounds
the jail
like
the
that speaks
resources.
to a political issue that the report raises a little bit also in terms of, and I know in your Keys to the Jail report you talk about the amount of oversight that the city has over the sheriff's office. Now, like I said, I've been here for a long time, and every year people complain about Sheriff Fody being anything but transparent, that was his kingdom, and that was the way it was. And I don't believe that was correct then, and I still believe transparency. But I think that issue of now that still exists in terms of the sheriff is duly elected on his or her own, but yet are dependent upon the money from the city. And so they all have their own, duly elected nature, and that creates an inherent conflict right there. I want you to address that, but let's take this caller first. We have Ed, a first-time caller on WBOK. Good morning, Ed. You're on the Good Morning Show.
Okay. Good morning, everyone listening.
Yes.
My name is Ed. I have a comment and a question. First, I'm going to give you my comment. My comment is I'm 75 years old, lived in New Orleans all my life. I'm subscribed to the BGR email newsletter, and I've gone through a few of them. But on this voting thing for this, that's hard for me right now. I'm on a fixed income. But I'm old enough, this is my comment, I'm old enough to remember when the lottery and all these scratch-off tickets program came through here. And I'm wondering why we got to keep paying more taxes if the lottery was supposed to take care of school teachers, policemen, firemen, and all of that. How come all of this money leaves Orleans Parish and never come back to help anybody in the parish? This lottery has been going on for years. Long ago that when Governor Edwards was in office, the gambling was statewide. Why
Yes.
do we have to keep paying taxes and none of this money comes back to Orleans Parish? I don't understand that.
Great question, Ed.
I'll hang up and listen.
All right, thank you, Ed. Yeah. So, was the lottery money ever designated to the jail? And where does that money go? Right. That's another question I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Boy, I wish I knew the answer. I mean, there's so much in taxation about where they go, but I think Ed, speaks to the point that that the power of taxation is not infinite. Like, people's wallets are not infinite, and that's why you need to choose carefully about where public expenditures go, because once the tax is on the books, everybody's required to pay it.
Mm-hmm. And speak to that issue before Ed came on, in terms of that kind of inherent conflict, in terms of city council being, giving the money, but the sheriff being elected on their own and basically responsible for the money once they get it.
Yeah, so there's a really lousy structure here in Orleans Parish. I mean, the sheriff's office is completely different, set up in a completely different way than it is in the other 63 parishes. And there's this real mismatch that that the city is legally required to fund the jail, but the sheriff, as an independently elected official, is responsible for the jail. And so what that's meant is that the two parties have always been able to talk past each other, and the city can always say, we don't want to give the sheriff more money because we don't trust them. And then the sheriff can say, well, no surprise that things aren't working so well at the jail because I don't have the money that I need. And so when Paul did this big report last summer called The Keys to the Jail, we called for the city and the sheriff's office to come together and form a cooperative endeavor agreement and agree that even though they are separately elected, one's a parish, one's a city entity, that they're going to come together and they're going to share information. They're going to agree to, to form a plan together that they're both invested in and fund. And even as we say that we're not in favor of this tax proposition, we feel very strongly that the city has a role to play in adequately funding the jail and making sure they have a role to play in getting the Orleans Justice Center out of the consent decree and making sure that it hits minimally constitutional requirements. And I think Paul probably has a lot more to say.
Well,
on
just
this.
Quickly on that there's some positive signs here, because the city and sheriff have come to agreement on a raise of about $2.50 per employee. That's $5,000 a year, and for the average salary there at the sheriff's office is not high, and so that's meaningful dollars to people, and so that's something to build on. They've come to that agreement, and again, as we said, the sheriff is to be credited for putting this all on the table, and the city, now must come to the table as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that conflict that we're talking about, which is inherent in the design, And you mentioned a cooperative endeavor agreement. That may be a way. I know, there's offices like, the Inspector General's office that has a designated percentage, by law in terms of what it has, it needs. Do you think something like that, I don't know if that's anyone in the reports, but that the sheriff, that there will be some formula developed, because you're probably right, that the money should come directly, all the money for the sheriff's office should come directly, from the city council, perhaps that's the way it's designed, rather than the sheriff having, these different streams or whatever. But it seems like to avoid this constant back and forth or fighting or what we've been having, how can we stabilize this and say this is what the funding is, and that's something that could be agreed? And I guess that was something that have to be voted on by voters.
Right. Yeah, so,
trying to solve problems here.
No, these are not easy issues, Torin. And while it's perfectly understandable why the sheriff's office would want to go for their own millage to have more control over the funding, our feeling has really been after looking at the jail through this Keys to the Jail report that we came out with last summer, is that the best solution is to make the city and sheriff work together, that is where the sustainable, enduring solution that will get us out of the consent decree and make sure that there is proper treatment of all the folks inside the Orleans Justice Center. And one concern that I have is that if, say the sheriff's office does get this independent millage, well, then there's less of an incentive for the city to be invested in the success of the jail and for them to be talking. And, by definition, a jail is a closed facility that not everybody, you can't just see it in your daily life and form an opinion about how it's working. And so we feel like it's just so important that there's public discussion about conditions at the jail, and that there is reporting out to the public. And if through the appropriations process, if you really double down on making the city come up with proper funding for the jail, then that means the sheriff's office would be going before city council hearings on a regular basis and reporting out to the public about the needs at the jail and how things are going at the jail, and that it would keep the focus on the city councilors having to appropriately fund the jail. And also that there is some accountability, that citizens could have a chance to hear how things are going, and that the funding could be adjusted accordingly depending on how much it's actually needed.
And I know we have a few minutes left, but I know, Paul, one of the things that you just also mentioned in the report is the seeming lack of time, or the timing of this, and the lack of public notice. I know the sheriffs have said, well, I've talked about this since I got elected, or even before I got elected, that these needs are there. But as regarding the millage specifically, so what did your research say in terms of when the sheriff actually did start promoting this or acknowledging it?
Yeah, the sheriff clearly has been, raising the issues. But the tax proposal itself kind of was slipped a little under the radar. She certainly met the legal obligations to notify the public of it. We discovered it through a public notice in the classified section of the newspaper, and we would typically like to see a little more being out front, and letting folks know proactively what you're asking them for and why you need the revenue. So that was a concern. Now, since that, subsequently, the sheriff's office has been very cooperative with us to provide information. We would have liked to have seen more time for voters to have more information to evaluate and assess the tax proposition.
You mentioned that the sheriff has 2 more years on it, this millage, so there's time, if it should not pass, for the sheriff to come back again. Has that happened before with issues such as this and ballots, propositions such as this?
Yeah, there have. I mean, I've only been at BGR for a little over a year, so I may punt to Paul on this one. But my understanding is the Jefferson Parish school system had proposed a tax that BGR had opposed, and And then they came back later with a lot more detail, and it was a very different picture.
Right. But I would add on this one, again, given what we were just talking about the best funding mechanism, the message we would like to send is not necessarily come back with another proposal for this tax. It more come back with a comprehensive plan to identify and fund the jail's needs. And, probably the best way to do that would be through the city's allocation, right-sizing that to the jail's needs.
Okay.
And again, as Becky alluded to, citizens holding the city council responsible for properly funding the jail.
Well, either way it goes, definitely 50 years of oversight and consent decree for a long time. We've had major issues at the jail in the past. The building, at least on the outside, looks much better than it used to look many years ago. We all know it's gone from 7,000 beds or MP residents, so to speak, to 1,000 or so. So major change at that level. But as I said, a few days ago here on this show, that it's easy to get arrested. I haven't been arrested, but it's easy to get arrested, and any one of us could spend a night or two in the jail. And you want it to be safe. You want to be safe. You want your friends or your relatives or whomever, your child, who may be an adult to be safe. And so it's all in our interest to have a secure, well-staffed, effective jail. And most people who are in jail are going to come out of jail. And so we definitely, don't want that to be a place of trauma and a place of what have you. So whatever it takes, we all need the sheriff to be successful. And I know you all want the sheriff to be successful. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the term, meeting constitutional requirements, what that really means is making sure that there is the most basic fundamental standard of taking care of people in a reasonable and decent way while they are in custody. And it's, think about, Torrin, when you were just mentioning, the historically large populations at the jail. Thank goodness it's a lot smaller now. But think about the number of families in town that have had a friend or a loved one spend some time in that building.
That's
and it's in everyone's interest to make sure that people are treated well while they're in there.
Well, hey, we thank you all for being with us. And hey, nobody likes voting for more taxes. So we don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how this is going to go. But thank you all for your analysis and the work that you all do on a regular basis, ongoing basis. And we look forward. Y'all should come back when you do other reports and be a partner here with WBOK and Equity Media.
We would love that. Thank you so much for inviting us on this morning. We really appreciate it.
Sure. All right. Well, that's Rebecca Mowbray, President and CEO of BGR, and Mr. Paul Rue, research and analyst with BGR, had great discussion about their report on the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office millage. Coming up next after the break, Mr. Jamar J. Waiters, real estate consultant, founder and owner of Title MD LLC, going to talk about this real estate in our city and how we can make sure we're in the right position and take advantage of what's happening right now for all of our residents. Coming up next after the break, WBOK, 12:30 a.m., the station you listen to all day long.